David Southwick is the recently elected Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. He's the Shadow Minister for a wide range of business-related portfolios, including the Shadow Minister for Jobs and Employment, the Business Recovery and the Shadow Minister for Small Business. And David joins us today at The Informer to talk about a roadmap out from this horrific state that we've ended up in. Welcome, David.
Great to be with you, Michael.
Likewise. Now, Dan Andrews with his roadmaps out, with 98% of the business economy being small business, basically the lifeblood of this state. We very rarely see Minister Pakula or Pulford fronting any of these conferences. Shouldn't they be front and centre, giving some sort of security and direction for small business?
Well, you're absolutely right, Michael. Small business is the absolute engine room of the economy. I very proudly are a former small business owner. I had an events business, a cosmetics company. So I know what it's like to actually run a business, employ people, and the challenges you have each and every day. So I feel, quite a privilege really to be having this portfolio, because I think it's really small business that will build the economy back to where it needs to be, ensure that we have the jobs that we need to have, and ultimately get Victoria back to where it once was, the most livable state, rather than what it has been, the most leavable and locked down state. We've had close to 45,000 people, I think it is, leave Victoria since the pandemic. That's the size of Wodonga. So we've got the size of Wodonga of people that have exited Victoria because of being locked down the longest of any other place in the world. It's a reputation, a brand that we don't want to have. We like holding records. We're pretty competitive in Victoria. We like being, top of the pops, but when you're at the bottom of the heap and you have the record for the world's most locked down state in the world, then there's something really that we've got to do to fix all of that. And I believe small business is going to be a key part of that going forward.
Now, David, I'm a former small businessman before I ventured into this wonderful world of journalism. Fell foul of some less than reputable, probably unscrupulous dealers. Went to VCAT, had a judgment awarded, went to the Magistrates Court, had it registered, and now they turn around and ignore it. I've thankfully been able to drag ASIC kicking and screaming to take action against it, but it's a company that's been phoenixed. Now, the Labor Party doesn't seem to be too interested in this sort of thing, and there would seem to me to be a deluge or a tsunami of this sort of activity going on, and it's actually happened with the Labor Party's blessing, it would seem.
Well, we all know about phoenixing when it comes to the Victorian government, and we saw that happening in the security industry that unfortunately led to 800 lives being lost with the first part of the lockdown. And that was done because we had a private security industry that was awarded a contract without a tender. So there was no tender. It was really jobs for the boys. And this particular company had a reputation of phoenixing, closing and opening again. And in fact, they were delisted in New South Wales. So a company that couldn't operate in New South Wales but could operate here in Victoria. And we have asked for several investigations into that company. That company has now gone again, completely closed its doors and have gone bankrupt. They'll probably pop up again because they've done that a number of times. But they now, the government had a debt to them, and the government's after effectively giving them the contract and now trying to claw back that debt. But we've got to have a level playing field. We've got to have confidence in small business. We can't have rogue operators. And, that's an example that needs to be fixed. And we would be calling on the government to fix those kinds of rogue operators and certainly prevent phoenixing from happening here in Victoria.
What will the Liberal Party do differently to what the Labor Party has announced with their plans?
Well, you have to excuse the bells because I'm in Parliament at the moment. But one of the things that we would do straight up is we would be a lot more ambitious in a COVID-safe way, of course, in terms of reopening. So the first part of this is reopening business. And we announced today in the hospitality sector that we want to bring back indoor dining at 70% double vax like New South Wales has. Our roadmap in Victoria at the moment, which is literally a couple of weeks away, has outdoor dining only at a 70% double vax, which means you can only have 50 people outdoors, no one indoors. So that's going to stop a whole lot of businesses from opening up. The other thing that we've announced today is we don't want a situation where local councils are imposing taxes and charges and license fees on businesses that are already on their knees and doing it tough. An example of that was the City of Yarra only the other day wanted to charge $5,000 for a car park for businesses in the city to operate outdoors. That's atrocious. And Yarla Pulford, the Minister for Small Business, all she's managed to do is to write a letter and say, very naughty people, you shouldn't do this. Well, we don't believe that's good enough. The government should step in immediately and revoke that and ensure that that small businesses are not charged additional fees and charges during the toughest period that I think any small business has had in our history.
Now, we've seen the recent workplace safety charges levelled against the government. To me and to anyone at the pub test, this seems like a ridiculous standard where the workplace safety has the potential to impose, for its 58 breaches, a $94 million fine on the government, who will write a cheque, hand it to the Workplace Safety Authority, and they will then hand it back to the government. Am I missing something here, David?
You're spot on, Michael. So the government's fined itself and is going to actually pay itself, and it's just a circular economy within this hopeless government. The fact of the matter is 58 charges were found against the Department of Health over hotel quarantine that killed 800 people. Anyone else would go to jail. In our instance, we've got the entity, be it the health department, charged. And the issue with this, Michael, is simply that businesses don't run themselves, departments don't run themselves. Someone's got to ultimately be accountable and responsible for this. And we believe the buck stops at the top with the Premier. The Premier was the one that couldn't recall the whole hotel quarantine fiasco, and all of his ministers are saying, well, it's not good enough that you're going to charge an entity and not an individual to take full responsibility for the hotel quarantine disaster, arguably the biggest policy failure in our history that killed 800 people.
Had it been a private firm, there would be industrial manslaughter charges levied, wouldn't there, David?
Well, you're 100% correct. So this government brought in industrial manslaughter charges and has failed at the first hurdle to impose its own charges. If it was a private company, as you say, that did the same kind of thing, they would be charged, they would be fined, and they would be jailed. So the government's failed at the first hurdle with these laws. And if it's good enough for the goose, it should be good enough for the gander. And really, it's atrocious that we've seen WorkSafe not being able to carry out. They've found the institution guilty. Now we've got to find the individuals to take the responsibility for that guilt.
And sadly, the Coates inquiry uncovered a case of massive amnesia or dementia. Either way, there's a captain at the ship, and the captain of the ship must know who was in charge, and if he doesn't, then the captain should put his hand up and step aside, surely.
Well, you see what's happened in New South Wales, where the Premier's fallen on her sword for an investigation. We have a Premier in Victoria that sat across a situation where 800 people had died as a result of bad government. We had, as you say, a workplace investigation, which has seen that his department found guilty of that. We've got now an IBAC investigation, which suggests that he's being investigated, although he hasn't necessarily confirmed that, but he hasn't denied it. If he's being investigated for firefighter union misconduct and in terms of how he's run his operation, well, no one in New South Wales, they're not waiting for the outcome. They've stood down. The Premier stood down. Well, it seems that we have a different level of scrutiny and accountability and transparency in New South Wales than we do in Victoria. And I think that's why so many people in Victoria are angry with a government that's ruled by fear, that doesn't hold themselves to the same standards that they expect everybody else to hold themselves to, that is not accountable for anything, and that ultimately has led to those lives being lost and us being locked down as long as we have been, with the slowest road out of this. It is the slowest road. And this is what's frustrating for many small businesses. New South Wales are opening up. I spoke to the retail industry. They're opening up as of now. And we've got to wait a couple of weeks. The retail industry in a couple of weeks will only be able to sell their goods from the street. So you've got to buy a handbag and shoes and a dress from the street, and you can't have people indoors for yet another few weeks. That's hopeless. Why are we in the tale of two cities, where you can do one thing in New South Wales, something else in Victoria, and Victoria's had the longest lockdown, the worst amount of deaths and cases, and now we're 3 times as high in terms of COVID cases in Victoria because the whole thing's been managed poorly by this government.
It really seems to be management by crisis rather than any firm, reasoned, long-term plans coming out of it. Now, with the vaccine mandates, I can see massive problems here for little 16-year-old shop assistants being forced to suddenly become gatekeepers and security, putting themselves at great risk, because we've seen the behaviour of some of these less than reasonable activists, rioters that, we're having our nurses spat on. How will we deal with this, David?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, Michael. We don't want small business to incur more costs. We don't want more small business to be the police as well. I think Victorians are doing the right thing. I saw the vaccine rates at about 83%, first vax today. So people are getting there. The national target for national cabinet, was 80% double vax. So we're well and truly underway for doing that without having to be hit over the head with a sledgehammer by this government. So, I would hope, and as per the other states where they have a target, New South Wales and some of the other states have December 1, where, we no longer need these things. I think we're going to get there. I think largely people are doing the right thing. I would hope that small businesses don't have to incur more costs. And I'd hope when we finally do get to those targets that we can relieve some of this so we don't need to have an ongoing management of scrutinising passports and everything else ongoing. Other places in the world haven't done that. Why should Victoria be any different?
All right, David, that was a fascinating chat, and I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Anytime, and all the best to you and your viewers.
Thanks, David.